for love now, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but there's this plethora of options on the table for everything, including love and friendships, and for some reason, if something...
Right now, a sealed court file holds a secret audio recording that Blake Lively is desperately trying to keep from the public. What's captured on that tape could completely dismantle her claims against Justin Baldoni. The twist? The person who was recorded without his consent is the one demanding its release. Blake's entire case hinges on allegations of verbal abuse, accusations that instantly dominated headlines. Yet now she's fighting to suppress the very evidence she once used to support her story. Steve Sawitz, whose voice is allegedly on the recording, is pleading for the court to unseal it, insisting that the full conversation will reveal the truth. It's a remarkable role reversal. The accused demanding transparency, while the accuser hides behind confidentiality. After all, if someone secretly recorded and edited your words to damage your reputation, wouldn't you want the unedited version out for everyone to hear? This isn't just another Hollywood legal drama. It's a war over narrative control and the manipulation of selective evidence. Blake got her viral moment. The outrage, the sympathy, the headlines about toxic behavior. But what happens if the uncut recording tells a very different story? What if the person she recorded has the one weapon she never expected? Context. That audio could either destroy Justin Baldoni's reputation forever or expose Blake Lively as someone willing to twist reality for media leverage. And given how fiercely she's fighting to keep it buried, it's clear which possibility she fears most. Just a week ago, Blake seemed to have the upper hand. She filed a sealed declaration demanding triple damages, accusing Baldoni's countersuit of being retaliation. Under California Law 47-1, victims who face retaliation for making credible assault claims can seek triple damages if they can prove their story. A bold and strategic move. But that same filing might now be her undoing. Hidden within it lies testimony from an anonymous witness. Someone her team claims must stay confidential for safety reasons. A standard precaution, except for one detail. That witness reportedly provided the explosive recording of Steve Sawitz. The timing raises serious questions. Blake files the declaration, the media frenzy follows, and suddenly, the mysterious tape becomes the most discussed secret in Hollywood. The question is no longer whether the recording exists. It's what will happen when the court decides the world has the right to hear it. Blake Lively accused Justin Baldoni of verbal abuse, then swiftly moved to seal nearly every piece of her evidence behind layers of privacy law. She wanted the explosive headlines without the uncomfortable scrutiny, the public outrage without the accountability. Her filing was so heavily redacted it resembled a classified government document. Entire paragraphs blacked out, pages missing, and only scattered fragments visible. Within those fragments were references to a conversation with Steve Sawitz, claims of verbal aggression, and mentions of an audio recording marked with exact timestamps. Blake had offered just enough to ignite outrage, but not enough for anyone to verify what truly happened. Wayfair Studios, representing Sawitz, immediately saw the problem. Protecting an anonymous witness was never the issue. That's standard procedure. Their concern was far more serious. The so-called smoking gun recording featured their client, who had never consented to being recorded. His private words were being weaponized through selective editing, while the complete recording remained hidden from both the public and the court. What Blake didn't anticipate was Sawitz's bold counterattack. Instead of denying or minimizing the recording, he demanded full transparency. He wanted every second of that conversation released, unedited, unfiltered, and unspun. Because when someone secretly records you and uses edited snippets to ruin your reputation, the only way to defend yourself is by revealing the full truth. That declaration, presented as legal evidence, was less about justice and more about strategy, a calculated media move disguised as a court filing. Blake had effectively used the legal system as a megaphone, shaping a narrative that could dominate headlines while hiding behind confidentiality laws to prevent anyone from challenging her version of events. But what happens when the person she secretly recorded fights back with the very thing she tried to bury? The unedited truth. The anonymous witness may have believed they were strengthening Blake's case. Instead, they might have handed her opponents the evidence that could dismantle it entirely. In reality, That so-called mystery witness may have handed Blake's opponents the very proof that unravels her entire case. When you record someone without consent, and that person demands transparency, your selective edits become everyone's business. And that's exactly what happened when Wayfair's lawyers uncovered evidence that flipped Blake's entire strategy upside down. According to Wayfair's legal response, the abuse tape did capture Steve Sowitz's voice during a private conversation with Blake's anonymous witness, but only fragments of that audio were ever presented to the court. Blake's legal team had submitted short, dramatic snippets stripped of all context, crafted to sound like verbal aggression. What they didn't include were the minutes before and after those sound bites, the parts that could completely change how the exchange was understood. Here's how it unfolded. Someone acting on Blake's behalf secretly recorded Sowitz during what he believed was a private discussion. That recording was then delivered to her legal team, who cherry-picked the most damaging lines, inserted them into her court declaration, and filed them as evidence, sparking an immediate wave of sensational headlines about abuse. And just as the media frenzy peaked, Blake's lawyers moved to seal the full recording from public access. She wanted the headlines, not the cross-examination. But in doing so, Blake's own filing confirmed the existence of detailed timestamps, precise, minute, and second markers that proved the audio was both real and complete. Those same timestamps also revealed something more damaging. Blake's team clearly had the full recording, not just fragments. And when someone holds the entire piece of evidence but only releases selected clips, it usually means the complete version tells a very different story. Wayfair's response was brutal. In their motion, they accused Blake's team of secretly recording their client without consent, manipulating the audio to destroy his reputation, and hiding behind privacy laws to dodge responsibility. Their demand was simple and absolute: release the full tape. Wayfair's team made their position crystal clear. Let the public hear what Steve Sowitz actually said, not the edited, media-tailored version that fit Blake Lively's narrative. Then came the most revealing twist of all. In her own filing, Blake admitted that releasing the full recording could result in adverse media exposure. That single line said everything. She wasn't concerned about privacy, safety, or legal boundaries. She was concerned about optics, about how the truth might look once it was no longer edited to her advantage. She had already orchestrated a PR storm by leaking selective quotes designed to shock the public, yet now claimed that transparency would somehow be harmful. So which was it? She wanted publicity when it served her agenda, but demanded secrecy when the facts threatened to undermine it. The snippets of supposed abuse may have sounded damning on their own, but the missing context, the moments before and after, could completely reshape the story. What if the exchange wasn't abuse at all, but a heated professional disagreement? What if the aggressive tone she described was actually defensive, a reaction to provocation? Those are the nuances her team is desperately fighting to keep sealed. Wayfair's filing went even further, accusing Blake of evidence manipulation, of crafting a media-ready narrative by isolating inflammatory sound bites, feeding them to the press, and then hiding behind sealed record laws to prevent cross-examination. That's not building a legitimate case. That's manufacturing a storyline. As investigators began piecing together the timeline, the inconsistencies multiplied. When exactly was the recording made? Did it occur before Blake's initial accusations? Or afterward, as part of a setup to strengthen her claims? And did she or her team instruct the anonymous witness to initiate the recording in the first place? Those answers, reportedly contained within the sealed sections of her declaration, are precisely what she's fighting hardest to suppress. What remains undeniable is that Steve Sowitz never consented to being recorded. His privacy was violated, his words distorted, and his reputation dismantled by headlines built on incomplete evidence. Yet, in a stunning reversal, he's the one demanding full disclosure, while the accuser, Blake Lively, is the one insisting on silence. That contrast says it all. When the person secretly recorded demands transparency, and the one who introduced the recording insists on secrecy, it's not difficult to tell who's confident in the truth. But for Blake Lively, This isn't just a moral contradiction, it's a potential legal disaster. California, where this conversation is believed to have taken place, has one of the strictest two-party consent laws in the country. Both participants must agree before any recording occurs. Steve Sowitz never gave his consent. That means the recording Blake's team built their case around isn't just questionable, it could be outright illegal. If the court confirms that the very piece of evidence she tried to weaponize was obtained through criminal means, it could destroy her entire case before it ever reaches trial. Sowitz had no idea he was being recorded. Under California's wiretapping laws, that makes the audio potentially inadmissible. Evidence collected through illegal means cannot be used in civil proceedings. In other words, Blake Lively may have used criminally obtained material as the foundation of her lawsuit. And the irony doesn't stop there. She now claims she's protecting privacy by keeping the recordings sealed. But whose privacy exactly? The privacy of the person who secretly recorded someone without consent? That isn't privacy protection, it's concealment. She violated Sowitz's privacy to create the recording, then invoked privacy law to prevent anyone from seeing how that recording was manipulated. It's not strategy, it's evidence tampering wrapped in legal language. Blake's entire legal playbook appears to hinge on a piece of evidence that could itself break state and federal wiretapping laws. Meanwhile, the true victim of that unauthorized recording, Steve Sowitz, is the one pleading for full disclosure. He wants the entire unedited recording released because he knows it will expose the selective editing and deliberate manipulation behind the accusations. From a legal standpoint, the implications are severe. Secretly recording someone in a two-party consent state without their permission is potentially a crime. Using that illegal recording to damage someone's reputation while concealing the full context amounts to evidence manipulation. And hiding behind privacy claims to prevent that person from defending themselves? That's weaponizing the legal system itself. Wayfair's legal team outlined this clearly for the court. Blake Lively's team may have obtained evidence through illegal means, exploited it to create sensational headlines, and is now invoking rights she forfeited the moment she recorded their client in secret. They aren't just challenging her story, they're dismantling the methods she used to tell it. There's also a geographic twist that could make things worse. In New York, where one-party consent laws apply, only one participant needs to approve a recording. But if, as evidence suggests, the conversation happened in California, Blake faces a far greater problem. California's two-party consent rule means her anonymous witness may have committed a felony, one that directly implicates her case. The consent issue shatters Blake's credibility. She's spent weeks portraying herself as a victim of retaliation and verbal abuse, yet secretly recording private conversations, editing them for impact, and feeding them to the press isn't the behavior of someone seeking justice. It's the behavior of someone trying to control the story, no matter the cost. It's calculated manipulation masquerading as legal advocacy. Steve Sowitz has every right to demand access to his own recorded words. They are his property, not Blake Lively's. She cannot claim privacy protection over evidence that violated someone else's privacy. Nor can she invoke secrecy laws to shield herself from accountability after using that same evidence to dominate headlines. But the consent issue is only the surface of Blake's unraveling. The way her legal team is fighting transparency exposes something deeper, a deliberate and systematic attempt to control the narrative. They aren't merely asking the court to seal evidence. They're exploiting every procedural loophole available to dictate what the public sees and what the press is allowed to report. The desperation is palpable. Her latest filings read like a case study in courtroom manipulation disguised as due process. The argument they present is deceptively simple, that the full recording must remain sealed to prevent adverse media exposure. But fear of bad publicity is not, and never has been, a valid legal basis to hide evidence. Courts, especially in the Southern District of New York, have rejected that rationale repeatedly. Yet Blake's lawyers persist, as if repeating a weak argument might somehow make it true. Wayfair's attorneys called it out for exactly what it is: overbroad, calculated obstruction. Blake isn't protecting a witness, she's protecting herself. Her motion to seal doesn't just conceal the identity of the so-called anonymous witness, It seeks to hide the timeline of events, the setting of the conversation, and the full context surrounding the alleged abuse. None of that information would compromise anyone's safety. What it would do, however, is reveal whether Blake orchestrated the entire recording after filing her initial claims, a detail that could expose the manipulation at the heart of her case. The pattern is impossible to ignore. Blake submitted selective quotes from the secret recording, ignited a wave of sensational verbal abuse headlines, and allowed that narrative to dominate entertainment media. But now that her story is showing cracks, she's fighting to bury the unedited version, the one piece of evidence that could contradict her claims. That isn't legal strategy. It's public relations control dressed up as confidentiality. And perhaps the most telling part of all is her team's own admission. In one of their filings, they openly acknowledge that the intense media interest surrounding the case stems directly from Blake's own decision to include those alleged excerpts from the tape in her court documents. In other words, she created the media storm herself, and now wants to silence it before it turns against her. She lit the fire, and now wants legal protection from getting burned. Wayfair's legal response tears apart Blake Lively's argument line by line, exposing how her sealing request doesn't meet the narrow tailoring requirement, the legal standard that allows only minimal redactions necessary to protect legitimate privacy or safety concerns. Instead, Blake is trying to bury far more than the law permits. Most of what she seeks to hide doesn't protect anyone's safety. It protects her story, the details she's desperate to conceal. The context, the timing, and the build-up to the recording could determine whether that audio was a spontaneous piece of evidence or an orchestrated setup made after her initial filings. That distinction is everything, and it's exactly what she doesn't want the court or the public to see. This is where her legal panic becomes visible. Blake's team knows that if the full, unedited recording is released, the discrepancies between her selective quotes and the actual audio could destroy her credibility overnight. They know the timestamps could expose that the conversation happened after her legal team had already begun drafting filings, suggesting premeditation or fabrication. And they know that once the full dialogue is heard, what she labeled as verbal abuse could easily be revealed as something else entirely. Perhaps a tense professional exchange stripped of its emotional and tonal context. Then comes the most revealing admission of all. Blake's justification for sealing the evidence isn't based on safety, trade secrets, or witness protection. It's based on adverse publicity. In other words, she wants to keep evidence hidden because the truth might embarrass her. But embarrassment is not a legal defense. And it certainly isn't a reason to suppress another person's words, especially when that person is demanding they be heard. Blake's position is paradoxical. She's trying to control another person's speech while portraying herself as silenced and victimized. The hypocrisy couldn't be clearer. Legal analysts are already describing her pattern as strategic opacity, a calculated approach where her team selectively leaks fragments of information to shape headlines, hides the rest behind confidentiality claims, and then plays the victim when challenged. This case is no longer just about one recording. It's about how Blake Lively is allegedly using the judicial system as a tool for narrative control, turning legal filings into press releases, manipulating evidence for publicity, and invoking privacy laws as shields against accountability. The more she hides, the more transparent her manipulation becomes. Because when the person recorded in secret pleads for openness and the accuser demands silence, it doesn't take a law degree to recognize who's being honest. What's emerging is a portrait of systematic manipulation, the alleged creation of evidence through questionable, possibly illegal, means, the strategic release of fragments to engineer headlines, and the weaponization of privacy laws to block scrutiny. Her legal team, instead of protecting a victim, appears to be enabling a sophisticated pattern of evidence management, one that stretches the limits of courtroom ethics and public trust. If the next round of unsealed documents confirms even a fraction of these claims, it could expose not just a failed legal strategy, but one of the most meticulously planned media operations Hollywood has ever seen. Accusations of evidence manipulation are now spreading beyond Wayfair's legal team. surfacing from multiple independent sources and forming a pattern that's becoming impossible to dismiss. Blake's conduct in managing evidence throughout this lawsuit reflects not chaos, but a deliberate and highly sophisticated strategy, one that appears to be carefully orchestrated from the start. She has already been caught misrepresenting statements and taking them out of context, and several content creators covering the case have reportedly faced unfounded legal threats from her team, accusing them, without any proof, of being secretly funded by Justin Baldoni to tarnish her image. If Blake is willing to make such false allegations against journalists, it raises a chilling question. How far might she go in manipulating evidence against the defendants themselves? At the center of the storm is a sealed recording that seems to expose her entire playbook. Step 1. Acquire material through questionable or potentially unethical means. Step 2. Release only selective fragments that can spark sensational headlines. Step 3. Use the legal system to suppress the remaining context that might undermine her story. Step 4. Assume the role of the victim whenever demands for transparency threaten to dismantle her carefully built narrative. Though presented as standard legal advocacy, this approach is, in reality, a form of calculated manipulation disguised as due process. What makes the situation even more alarming is that Blake's own legal filings acknowledge her fear of adverse media coverage should the full recording become public, an implicit admission that she herself generated publicity through selective leaks and now fears exposure of the full truth. Court documents show her team's attempts to conceal critical details about the timing of the meeting and the events leading up to the recording, not to protect anyone's identity, but to obscure whether the conversation was staged after her claims were filed. This detail could prove devastating, suggesting the evidence wasn't genuine documentation but rather a manufactured setup. Wayfair's attorneys have forcefully countered her tactics, accusing Blake of cherry-picking quotes to mislead the public and weaponizing private conversations to damage reputations, all while blocking any independent verification that could challenge her story. The most revealing contrast lies in Steve Sowitz, the person secretly recorded, who is the one now demanding full transparency, while Blake insists on secrecy. His insistence suggests that the unedited recording may paint a completely different picture, one that undermines the version Blake has released. Had Sowitz remained silent, her selective editing might have succeeded. But his push for openness turns what was once a PR advantage into a potential legal disaster, exposing the very real possibility of evidence tampering. This pattern extends far beyond a single recording. It reveals a larger, deeply coordinated effort to manipulate public perception by intertwining media influence with courtroom maneuvering. The consequences are escalating rapidly, not only for Blake's credibility, but also for the integrity of the judicial process itself. Allegations of judicial bias in her favor now threaten to erode trust in the federal court overseeing the case, transforming what began as a celebrity scandal into a test of how far manipulation and narrative control can reach inside the American justice system. Observers have begun to raise serious questions about the impartiality of Judge Lewis Lyman, whose rulings appear to consistently favor Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds. These concerns are not speculative. They stem from a series of controversial judicial decisions that seem to deviate from established precedent, casting doubt on the fairness of the proceedings. One particularly revealing example was Lyman's initial order compelling Katie Cassie and Brianna Costello to surrender documents classified as privileged. Only after Wayfair's attorneys demonstrated that those communications involved Jed Wallace, a client of the same law firm, did the judge reverse his order. This abrupt reversal raises unsettling questions. Was the initial decision a result of inadequate judicial review or an attempt, intentional or not, to advantage Blake's position? Either interpretation undermines confidence in the judge's neutrality. Over time, a pattern has become apparent.